Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. I appreciate you spending the time with us today. I'm going to cover quickly in some slides what's new in PPM 9.2x, I guess, starting with PPM 9.2 and then 2.1 and 2.2. As Zach mentioned, we'll be available to answer questions, and I'll run through and show some of these things in a live demo as well. But the big focus on this has been with the user experience and then the integrations and then some very nice usability features within PPM. So with PPM 9.2, there was a focus on the user experience, and I'll walk through some of these as we go into the demo, but they implemented asynchronous loading on dashboard pages so that each portlet loads independently, which is nice if you have a long-running portlet. They had a quick navigation on the request detail page, and I'll show that, and the pinned toolbar on the request detail page, and this is probably, for somebody who's been using PPM, you use requests and the request details, and you have to scroll back up to save or to make a workflow transition. Now they've pinned that toolbar at the top, so you always have the ability to immediately save or do a workflow transition. Probably one of the nicest features I like is the display tips for missing required fields. And then when you're creating a request type now, you can choose the most recently created from the top menu. And then a big focus in 9.2 on the integrations and building out a landing page to configure the integrations with ALM and Agile Manager, and I'll show that as well as we walk through this. So we talked about the new toolbar, and this is a screenshot of it, but this toolbar here remains pinned as you scroll up and down within the request details, and they also added this jump to section here. Talk about the integrations landing page, and I'll go through this when we go through the demo as well. So I'm going to spend just a short amount of time on the slides because I want to get into the demo. And then the setup of the integrations is all now within the UI for the ALM and the Agile Manager integrations. Another big thing with the ALM integrations is starting to bring the ALM scorecard and some of the portlets directly from ALM into the scope of PPM, and this is all enabled via the integration between the two that's done in the UI, so it's very easy to set up, and I'll show you how to do that. In PPM Center 9.2.1, and I'll quickly go through this as well, they allowed the ability to integrate PPM Center tasks with multiple ALM releases versus one, and I'll show you that. So you can now have a task in PPM that's linked to multiple releases within ALM. There were some enhancements to the Agile Manager integration. This ability to link waterfall projects and Agile projects on PPM tasks, this is the start of being able to have within a waterfall project a sub-project, and there's a timeline view that shows that capability. And then they've also introduced the PPM Time Entry Mini app on HP 10 for HP Anywhere on a mobile time entry, and then support for PPM on Safari on the iPad within PPM 9.2.1. The Agile Manager integration solution, and I can show this in the demo as well, where you basically link a task within your PPM work plan to a release within Agile Manager, and then all of the subsequent sprints and user stories and the structure of that Agile work plan, the Agile release, the structure of that release is represented within the scope of PPM, so that you can actually see the user stories and sprints and tasks that are being completed on the Agile release, as well as the ability to bring, and these are not good screenshots, but the sprint burn up, the sprint burn down directly into the scope of the PPM project overview page. So this is actually in the project overview page. And then the real focus here is what's new in PPM 9.2.2, a product that's been out now only for a few weeks, but some significant improvements and significant changes to PPM came with PPM 9.2.2. So the highlights really are more user experience improvements, and several enhancements in the resource management area from a usability perspective. Some continued enhancements on the integrations for ALM and Agile Manager. If you're using application portfolio management, there's been a UCMDB integration created so that you can bring the applications in now from the UCMDB, and they've added a roadmap entity to the application portfolio management. A few pretty big certifications within 922, including on the Win 7 and Win 8 platform, the IE10 compatibility, or IE10 certification in compatibility mode only, CA SiteMinder V12, and certification on the HP Elite Pad. One that I like quite a bit is the ability to create dashboard data source and a list portlet from a SQL select statement automatically. There's some new MLU support, some multicast and performance improvements, and some new encryption libraries. So just like they did in 921, or 920, I guess, they've now added this pin toolbar and summary section to the project overview page, or the project details within the project container. So that's great, because it makes this just as usable as the request form is now. They've, in a couple of places, added on save prompt added on a couple of pages, so they're prompting to ensure that you don't lose the data if you navigate off of a couple of pages. Those two pages are on the project overview page, all within that container, and then in edit timesheets, these warnings have been added so that you at least are prompted if you're trying to leave without saving changes. The request creation confirm page can be removed optionally. So now when you create a request, up at the top it says your request has been created and here's a request number. And so now you can just have it, it stays right in the request as opposed to closing it out and going back, and then you have to go back in. And that's a setting within the server.com to decide whether or not you just want to stay where you are, or actually have it behave the old way, which is it creates the request and then gives you a link to go back into it. On the resource management side, there's been quite a few enhancements specifically in the staffing profile for the enhanced user interface and performance. You can see that this is using the new Google Web Toolkit table component, which allows you to do filtering within the fields and field sizing, as well as sorting within these fields. And so it's a much more usable UI within the scope of that staffing profile, including the filtering on the fields and the sorting. And then in several places they've added the capability to do native type exports to Excel. The difference between what was happening before when you could export to Excel and this is they're actually exporting now the full colors and actually exporting it almost exactly like it looks on the screen. So it's a much more usable export in its initial pass at the export. From a staffing profile perspective, there were a lot of enhancements using a tree grid to display the staffing profile allocations. This means you have the ability to expand and collapse so that if you have a staffing profile with lots of positions and lots of resources, you can expand and collapse in that grid to be able to make it more usable. There's position filtering added, total summary at the very bottom, the total summary of the staffing profile data is there, the ability to resize columns, the highlighting and centering of the current period, and there's paging and partial refresh capability also added from a performance perspective. So you can see here now you have the expand and collapse capability all of these fields are sizable and sortable, and you can actually filter on those as well. And so as you click on the arrow buttons here, that will expand and collapse each of those positions or roles and bring those into scope. Here's an example of the filtering where you can filter by position label, or you can search for certain allocations within a time period, position, or resource. So if you have a large staffing profile, it's very easy to find a position or a resource on that staffing profile leveraging the filtering. And then the total summary we talked about, where you have the forecast total, the assignment total, and the unmet total for the staffing profile at the very bottom of it. I talked about this a bit, where they have the Excel format. So, you know, it's you used to export a data table to an Excel type HTML page where Microsoft skills and tips are restricted. The enhancement is it's a native Excel export at this point for the places that they put this in, and I think there were two key resource management pages, the staffing profile page and the search resource page, where they added the Excel export. Actually, there's a couple more. And then they added Excel export option for the resource finder, manage allocations, manage forecast, and search resource availability. On the PPM ALM integration, you can now manage both projects and ALM releases, so you can link to both projects and ALM releases, and you get the visibility of the quality KPIs coming in, including the requirements, coverage, test, execution status, and defect trend, and the ALM scorecard within PPM. And what's new in 9.2.2 is you can actually filter those results. Previous to that, you would just get all defects as an example, or all requirements. Now you can filter for what specific type of defects or requirements, or the status of those defects or requirements that you want to include in the PPM portlets that show up. So here's an example of that advanced filtering, where you have the open defects trend chart in PPM. You can now say just new and open. Before it was bringing, I believe, just open. So you have the ability to adjust these and make them, you know, you might want rejected or reopened, included as well, and you can make those changes. And you can filter on requirements, priority defects, and open defects. As far as the installation of the ALM integration, there are a couple of jar files that you have to install. But once that's done, you get the quality task tab, and I'll show this, the quality project tab, and then there's a project quality sync service that synchronizes the integration. And once again, the integration is all set up within the UI, which makes it very easy to integrate with ALM. The ALM integration compatibility matrix. So the manage application change, which is really the synchronization of defects and requirements between PPM and ALM, that still exists in PPM 9.2 on the ALM version 10.11 and 11.5. So 11.5 is certified with 9.2. The new view project quality capabilities are on both ALM 11 and 11.5 with PPM 9.2. And then the Center Management for Quality Center, which is the legacy solution that these are fundamentally replacing, is not supported on PPM or ALM 11.5 and PPM 9.2. So I think those are the key highlights of the compatibility. The Agile Manager integration, the timesheet synchronization is a new feature in 9.2, and this is really where, if you are leveraging Agile Manager and your developers are capturing the time spent on user stories that they're developing within Agile Manager. This gives the ability to avoid that double entry and actually import all of that time into a PPM timesheet. And so, this is really, as we look at the overall view of PPM and Agile Manager together, where within PPM you have business objectives and proposals, and you fund those projects, and then you really decide at that point, or based on the project or the organization, it's going to be some traditional method like waterfall or potentially an agile project. This is where the Agile Manager integration fundamentally comes into play, and I'll show that as well as we go through this. The solution from an Agile Manager perspective, you're doing your project management in PPM, you map that to a release within Agile Manager. The backlog, the sprint, the user stories, all of those come back into the PPM work plan, and this was all done in PPM 9.2, and then the actual effort from the tasks within Agile Manager coming back into time management was added in PPM 9.2.2. The way this was implemented is there's a new, on the timesheet policies, there's a new external data tab that you have to check. So you have to go into your timesheet policy and you have to check that external data is allowed for timesheets. And then you fundamentally go into the timesheet and add that external data for the given resource, and it'll pull the time from Agile Manager into your timesheet. So the user flow here is that the user opens their timesheet, and then they would basically add an item from an external system, and it would pull in automatically all of that time that they logged in Agile Manager into the timesheet. And I'm not sure that I can show that today, but I'll try. And this is just another view of it showing the actual effort coming into time management. A couple of important certifications, and I think we covered this in the summary slide, but the CentOS v6 server on HP Cloud Services only is certified. The client OS of Windows 8 was certified. We talked about the browser certification for IE10, the HP ElitePad, and then CA SiteMinder 12 were added in 9.2.2. We talked about the ability to do a dashboard data source create from the Admin Console SQL Runner. I actually used this the other day. It's really cool. It works, and you can put whatever SQL you have right into the SQL Runner, and you can click on this Create Dashboard Data Source, and it creates a data source and a list portlet for you. So that's the screenshot of how you do that. I don't know if anybody on the phone is using MLU, but if they are, there's a couple of changes to MLU in 9.2.2 that are pretty significant. Before 9.2.1, if you had an autocomplete list field, the value displayed, regardless of who pulled like a request back up, was in the language of the last user that modified that field. And in 9.2.2, or 9.2.1 and 9.2.2 now, it's now displayed in the language of the logged in user. So if the last user to update it was in Spanish and I pulled up in English, I would see the English translation of that Spanish value in the autocomplete list. And it also applies to SQL validations. And the MLU support for those autocomplete fields was covered across the request details page, columns and table component, plus the export to Excel, the request advanced search, and the request list portlet. A couple of more platform level changes here. There was a change in the multi-node, multicast capability. There was a bit of homegrown multicast code that was being used that was taken out and replaced with the JGroups functionality with some built-in error correction. So this is really just an improvement in that multicast between the multi-nodes in a multi-node environment. And then a couple of performance improvements, one specifically in the project overview page when there were lots of risks, issues, and scope changes. And the second was when there were security groups accessing a large amount of complex security groups, there was a challenge doing that within the workbench, and that's been addressed in 9.2.2. All right, so I'll go ahead and I'm going to open another browser here with a different, I'm going to use a couple of different environments here just because of so this is actually a 9.2.2 environment, and I'll go ahead and just confirm that. So this is 9.2.2. So some of the significant ones in 9.2.2, so we'll start there and go backwards, is in the project overview page, or if we pull up a given project now. In the project details tab, we now have this same capability of being able to jump to a given section within it, and the pinned toolbar where we can always immediately, if I change a value here and need to save that, I can save it without having to scroll back up to the top or scroll to the bottom of the details section, as well as do the workflow transitions from right within the scope, so that's always done. So really, those are the two major changes in the project summary, the details section of the project summary within 9.2.2. The ability to create the portlets is from the SQL runner within, and so if I just simply write select username, first name, last name from KNTA users and run that SQL, hopefully I get the names right, you can simply click on this create dashboard data source, and I'll just call it, and then you can actually create the list portlet as well, and enable in the data source in the list portlet, and click the button, and that is now completed. So if I go back to a dashboard here, we'll just go to this very first dashboard, I should be able to now add my new list portlet. Let's see if it actually works. There's my portlet I created. If I add it, you can now see that I have a portlet that lists those users from that SQL. So that's pretty helpful for creating list portlets. It's a lot faster than having to create the data source and create the portlet. The other area I'll cover here within 9.2.2 before I jump back to the previous version, this is this managing of the integrations within PPM now. So the integration page where you set up your manage application change integrations for defects and requirements is all configured right here. The view project quality is also configured right here, and you can actually see it's as simple as identifying how do you get to ALM and how do you authenticate to set that integration up. And similarly with the Agile integration solution with Agile Manager, it's a similar setup of those. And it really is that easy. I mean, out of the box, once they're installed, it's a matter of finding out where your ALM integration or ALM instance is and providing the authentication and setting up the mapping, for instance, for defects and requirements is very straightforward with the new version. In fact, if we look at the defect one here, you can actually see we have to give it the username and password. It's asking for a time zone. They have to be the same on ALM and PPM. It's asking for a domain and a project to use, and then how do you want to integrate it, whether you want, PPM wins, ALM wins, or they both synchronize together. And then you actually get into a screen where you're mapping the fields. So mapping the defects fields from ALM into fields on that specific request type that you're mapping it against. And then even the ability to map values, like in the case of severity, if they were different between the two instances. And I might have a challenge with my browser here, but the ability to map values is also done within here. And then you fundamentally save that integration, and it starts working with the synchronization service. So a couple of other places, and I'm going to jump into my 921 environment to show these because I have projects set up. If I look at the integration, you can see the asynchronous portlet loading happening there. You'll notice within 921 and 922, you have some new tabs that are added in this. So it used to be just the summary, the details, exceptions, and references. They've added the timeline tab. Basically gives you the ability to see the linkage between your overall project and either other mapped waterfall projects, or in this case, these are mapped to Agile Manager. And so you can see that this Mercury Tours project has multiple releases within Agile Manager, and you can see a timeline of when those releases are scheduled to be delivered. You can also click, and this is not going to show good data because these releases are outdated, but you can also click, and what you'll see here is the sprint burn up and burn down charts when these releases are active. All of these are completed releases and against different versions of Agile Manager, but ultimately this is the reporting you would see from Agile Manager. And similarly on the quality tab, where you have the ability to see a link to the quality and then the charts, and I just don't have good demo data set up right now to show these charts, but you can directly link to ALM, and ultimately these would show, if I go back to the picture here, these would be these charts here where you see your release requirements status and your release open defects and your release priority defects trends, as well as the ALM scorecard within the scope of PPM and that quality tab. And you can actually click and go directly to ALM and the task details, and then link into ALM as well. And this is once again at the lower level. So so that was at the project summary. At the task level, you start to see your quality tab here, where you get the same thing, and this is actually where you do the linking between PPM and ALM, and you can see we're looking at ALM release 10.5, and you can remove and re-add that integration or add it to another one. And then the hybrid project piece is where you actually link a given task to another PPM project or the Agile project within this. And so I'm currently in the Mercury Tours project. If I have another project that's set up in here with a waterfall type linkage where you get the same type of thing. So if I go to APO Pilot, and this would be the case if you had a sub-project that was another waterfall project and you wanted to see that timeline view, that's what I did here, is I fundamentally mapped the APO pilots, the overall project, but there's a sub-project called Rollout Plan that's mapped here within that. And then when you click on the Rollout Plan, you can actually see a mini overview of that project in the scope of really the parent project. Oh, we didn't go into the resource management stuff in 9.2.2. Let me go ahead and do that. All right, I'll just jump into a staffing profile here, and we'll start to look at the new layout of the staffing profile. And so here's where we can see the capability to expand or collapse. So for instance, business analyst, we expand that. We can expand all positions or collapse all positions. You have the ability to size the fields as well as filter on the field. So if I just want to see all new, then you can see it that way, and you can go ahead and remove the filter by selecting all. You have the paging capability, so you can decide to show 100 per page or just a few per page. You still have the allocations here. Those, I think, are the major ones, and then the forecast total, as well as the assignments total and the on-net demand total are added for that and the performance side of it. So the ability to size these, as well as the filtering on resource pool status and position. And there's the filtering by position we saw within the screenshot. There's one feature I didn't show, so actually let me show, and I actually like this. One of the features they added when you create a request was the ability to actually get the missing required fields, and so I just came into a new proposal, and it actually gives you links to those required fields, and you can just fill it in. I forgot about this one, so that's a nice feature from a usability perspective, where you can very quickly get the missing required fields filled in. But as far as the project stuff, so let me search a given project, and I'll show you how the mapping works, and then maybe we can talk about the differences. So if I just pick, let me pick something that's, maybe we'll pick this Commerce Center 6.0 project. And so as this comes up and we go into the work plan, say, for instance, that you had, we're seeing detailed design, build, test. Say, for instance, in test, you had a completely separate project plan for system tests. So what you can do is on that task, you can actually go into the hybrid project. I'm sorry, you can't do it at the summary task level. You need to go one level below that. So let me go back. And so perform system tests, say that had its own project plan. If you go into this and go into the hybrid project, then you can map a waterfall project. And what this does is it searches for projects that are within basically the start and finish time of this project, and you're able to then link them. And so here's a good example where this Commerce Center 6.0 testing project maybe is a separate project plan. I clicked on the wrong thing, but you basically click over here, and then you go ahead and confirm that mapping. And if we save that and say we're done, I think the difference is that it's fundamentally just showing you the timeline view of the work versus, within the, it's not going to roll up the financials, for instance, from this sub-project into the project. It's just a different view where you see the overall timeline. So let me see if I can get back to the summary of this now. So that's linked. You don't even visually see it in here, but where you do see it is when you start looking at this overall timeline view that's at the highest level of the project. And so now if we go here, what you can see is that we have Commerce Center, and then this Perform System Test is a separate plan, and here's what you get to see about it. I don't think that they've yet implemented even the dependencies, but this is not going to roll up financially into the parent project. It's just to give you that hierarchical view of a sub-project and full project capabilities or full project management capabilities of the sub-project. Now, if you wanted this still to roll into a program, I think you would have to create both of these as part of the program. You would have to create both of these as part of the program to get the financials to roll up together. There's one other feature that I'd like to show that it's not on any of the slides, but this is pretty powerful especially if you're an admin of PPM and debugging PPM. They've added some new capabilities for debugging where you can actually have, let me just get logged in here again. So I actually turned on a debugging console, and this thing's actually really good if you're trying to understand a portlet that's taking a long time or things like that from a performance perspective. If I go into, let's just go into program management. This actually shows the debugging console, if you show it, shows some of the things that are happening really at that Ajax level. But the one that I use quite a bit is on the SQL side. This actually shows all of the SQLs that are executed during that session and how long they're taking and how many times it's been executed. And you can actually drill in and get to the specific SQLs that are executing within the scope of that. So from a debugging perspective, this is pretty valuable. What I found myself using it for is if I have a portlet, for instance, that's running a long time, I'll isolate that portlet onto a page and I'll turn this on, and then the only thing you see is a SQL that portlet is running from a debug perspective. So that's a feature that you can turn on within even your production environment, and it's accessible by a special set of keystrokes and clicking on this on the PPM console or the icon up there, and it'll enable that debugging. Disable and enable it by clicking on that. So if there are any admins out there, that one's pretty valuable to be able to see exactly what's happening within a screen or a form within PPM.